My name is Justin LeClue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we are talking about Mikio Naruse.
And if you think that Justin's voice is just a little lower, a little more mellow than it usually is, doesn't have that kind of bombast that he's become known and beloved for.
It's because we're talking about Japanese cinema, and I want to be more serious than we usually are.
It's because this poor boy is getting over a debilitating illness.
Yes, that's why.
He's trying not to destroy his throat. So, looks like it's going to be on me to provide the laughs, the energy, the enthusiasm.
Oh no, he's making me cough already!
All right.
It's like I'm in a Japanese melodrama, and before I had my time, I'm like coughing up blood, being like, oh, it's almost over, Will.
We got Ikiru right across from me right here.
Oh God, I hope not.
So, Mikio Naruse, this is the first of 4 Japanese filmmakers we'll be doing in the next 4 episodes. What I kept reading this week, of course, is that there are 3 great mid-century Japanese auteurs who get all the attention. Kurosawa, Mizoguchi, and Ozu. And then there's Naruse, who's just a little bit overlooked.
And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that he was incredibly prolific. And because of that, there is a kind of, well, where do I start? Which is the best one? Let's watch an Ozu instead.
And a lot of them kind of look similar.
Yes, because he made dramas about middle-class people dealing with issues. There's also the fact that a lot of his films are kind of fatalistic and nihilistic.
That's what people keep saying about him, that he's fatalistic, nihilistic. You see those words come up over and over again. And it's funny, like they are downbeat, they are tragic. A word like nihilistic carries so much negative energy to it. And I think these movies moved me very deeply. And I think anything that does that is
not nihilistic, because that would leave more of a bitter taste in your mouth.
I think so, because nihilism implies that there's no hope. And I feel like...
Well, these movies oftentimes, and we'll discuss the plots of them, they are these kind of little pockets in the long lives of these characters where a moment of hope is presented, and then they cannot take that opportunity for multiple reasons, and they have to go on basically on the path that they already were.
Well, Naruse made 89 movies, and I've seen 5 of them in my life now, so don't assume I'm any sort of expert on this. But the movies I've seen are all... very much about how life is difficult, and to some degree, it's the systems and structures and values that our society, or Japanese society in this case, has erected that make life very hard. We see the characters in these movies running up against the constraints of what society expects a woman should be, or a husband should be, or a family should be. But then the people also run up against their own heads and hearts, We see the people in these movies having feelings that are often very difficult and inconvenient.
And they're complicated feelings as well. Is that, oftentimes in kind of middle-class dramas, there may be the feeling of, well, why don't you just do this one thing? And if you did this one thing, that would solve the problems of this. And kind of like Douglas Sirkian, it's so complicated that you can understand why they end up where they do at the end of these stories.
As a great man once said, the heart wants what it wants. So these movies tell very direct and elegant stories of how hard it is to be in the world. And I don't know, I guess it is... They tend to end quite tragically. They show how these systems and these feelings like create these walls around us that are hard to get over. I mean, like a lot of those Japanese directors that we mentioned earlier, he's also operating in this mid-20th century post-war context for the most part, where, there's this infiltration of Western values and aesthetics.
Globalized modernity is being imposed on these cultures, even though that he doesn't believe necessarily that those cultures are better. But they're just different, and they're also destroying what is there.
Ozu deals in this stuff a lot, too, and I wouldn't call either him or Naruse reactionary. Like, they're not saying, like, get off my lawn about this stuff. Because also in, like, the Naruse films, a lot of these traditional structures that are binding the characters in lead to their ruin, especially in A Woman Ascends the Stairs. It's complicated. There's still, though... Yeah, like there's sadness about these structures, and there's also sadness about the passing of time and traditions and all this. And I think all of this makes it more complicated than just bleak and nihilistic, because like if it was nihilistic, things wouldn't change.
But is it nihilistic in the sense that there is the offer of change and then there's no escape from that?
Time moves quickly, but also moves very slowly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also in life, there's very rarely change that is something that people can act on consciously. Oftentimes it is forced upon them. And that's not really what these movies are about.
These movies are also, very beautiful. They're not ostentatious. He's not showy like Kurosawa is, or, Ozu is slow paced, but Ozu almost like created his own film language.
Well, he's very, set in his formalistic ways. An early studio that Naruse worked for said, like, we already have an Ozu. It's like, you have to go find your own style, buddy.
Yeah, and I would say that the Naruse movies, based on my limited experience with them, they're more conventional melodramas than, say, the Ozu movies are. I love to just, by the way, like
a broad blanket on like this almost 100 film career.
and also just like boiling down a national cinema into like 3 directors and being like, well, he's a bit like this one, but a little bit like this one.
But anytime you see him mentioned, that's exactly how they discuss him.
Yeah.
We're only coming from him from a Western perspective of what was released. What's interesting is that, like, Naruse, one of his films is claimed to be the first one that was released internationally for American audiences, like Japanese films coming to America to be released. And that was an early sound film that he made, Wife Be Like a Rose. And I couldn't find that many like articles about it, but it was supposedly not even well reviewed by American press upon its release.
Yeah, so this is one that we both watched for this episode. I'd never heard of it, to be honest, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was just...
well, what a great movie, isn't it?
Like, my God. So the main character is this white-collar girl in Tokyo. She's young. She's looking to get married to her fiancé.
She's working as well, which is very important. You mentioned white-collar, but she is like the breadwinner for the house.
Mm-hmm. And she lives with her mother, who's a poet and an intellectual, and her father has abandoned the family, basically. He's gone into the countryside somewhere, and she sort of knows where he is, but he's much estranged. She saw him on the street once recently, but wasn't able to find him. And she needs him as a mediator for this marriage. She needs him to approve it. So she goes to the countryside, finds that he has a whole new family. He has a whole new, I don't know if she's a wife exactly, but maybe she's the mistress, but whatever she is, she has grown dependent on him, and he's got new kids over there too. So much of the drama of the film, or the moral dilemma of the film, comes from the fact that, look, it's a terrible thing to abandon your family, but also he was very unhappy there, and he has this new family that depends on him. And so what is the moral thing to do? What is the moral thing for him to do, and what's the moral thing for her to expect of him?
But you also get this last 15 minutes of the film where he comes back home to do an act with the wife that he abandoned. And basically that wife realizes this is not the man that I've created in my mind. The one that abandoned is this big romantic figure. No, he's just a human being who doesn't necessarily like the things that I like or reacts the way I want him to react. And there's also a sadness there that, like, this person that was gone is now back, and this thing I was yearning for never really existed in the first place.
Yeah, devastating. And I mean, the young girl also has to reckon with the fact that, well, maybe my father being here actually isn't, maybe it would be a bit better for me, but it would certainly be not as good for a lot of other people. Mm-hmm. And having to have the maturity to accept that. And obviously, again, abandoning your family is probably a not very nice thing to do, but emotions are complicated.
And we should stress again, this is a beautiful looking movie. Like the little camera moves, the way that it's edited. I mean, as a director, he's a master of the form of using all of these things together to hit that emotional point without having to underline it. And that's just beautiful in its own right.
His most famous movie is probably A Woman Ascends the Stairs from 1960. We're fast forwarding very far into the future here, well after the Second World War. And in this one, there are 3 kinds of bar hostesses in downtown Tokyo. There are the ones who take a cab home, there are the ones who take the tram home, and then there are the ones who go home with the customers. And existing perhaps somewhere between the first 2 categories is Keiko, who's played brilliantly by Naruse's long returning, I think he made 30 films with her or something, leading actress Hideko Takamine. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that.
I should say that Naruse is also, as a director, someone that everybody said was unknowable, that even the people who worked with him for like 30 movies said he never really gave any direction and we never knew him as a person, that he kind of like would ride the bus to work like silently thinking about what he was going to do next, as opposed to like interacting or being a big personality.
Now, this character of Keiko, she's a widow and she works as a hostess. She doesn't sleep with the customers. She very consciously has not sought out that sort of relationship, sort of out of respect for her dead husband.
Oh man, all the movies that we watch is often having respect for like either a loser man or a dead man.
Yes, but she also has like clientele. She has like men who visit her, and she's 30, so she's getting at the age of like, do you marry again? Probably not. Do you become a spinster? You're not going to be a bar hostess forever. Like pretty much.
Do you own a bar?
Do you own a bar? That can be something you do. Or do you start to do other sorts of things for money? Do you maybe become one of those bar hostesses who goes home with the customers? And this is the big dilemma. And she spends much of the movie seeking to create a new bar for herself, to become an entrepreneur like the most successful hostesses do. And the film is a succession of her trying to work with these various men who,
are shit.
Who are shit, yes.
This is a common theme through the filmography of this filmmaker, is that the men are losers, they're liars, or they're just broken in a way that the women, who are often the central characters, are trying to not fix, but figure a way to survive, and by doing that, oftentimes drag themselves under as well.
Yes, and so much depends on the women.
Mm-hmm.
The women, whether in a domestic situation or in this case as a bar hostess, like they absorb so much from all these characters, and they're often like, the pillar that holds, the families or the communities together. And what thanks do they get? None.
They usually get lied to, and what little hope they have is just torn away from them in the final moments of the picture.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a superficial thing to say, but Hideko Takamine, the very understated performance she gives here, in great contrast with the performance she gives in Hit and Run in 1964.
Well, the thing about her character in this movie is that she is playing multiple roles as the film goes on, right? That she has to be in front of people that she works with. She has to be a certain way. In front of the customers, she has to be a certain way. And then you also get to see her behind the scenes, where you hear voiceover narration, which is then defining her in the way she sees herself. And all of those different pieces need to work, need to feel distinct from each other, but also have a connective thing that you're like, oh, I understand where they all come from.
Yeah, and there's so much happening, on the surface of her performance and also internalized in her performance. It's a really heartbreaking piece of acting, especially, that last shot again, devastating.
I mean, spoiler in the title.
Yeah, a woman ascends the stairs. It's true. Before we get to the further films, just a little bit of biographical information about Naruse, who I realize that we haven't talked a lot about his story. He was in filmmaking pretty much for his entire life. He was born in Tokyo in 1905, but then joined the famous Shochiku film studio like when he was 15, and he was working, as a crew assistant. He was working in the lights. Eventually, he was taken under the wing of this very prolific and popular comedy director, worked for him a lot. I don't have that guy's name in front of me right now, but it wasn't, he spent a decade just doing odd jobs in lighting at Shochiku until 1930, when he was finally allowed to direct a film of his own. I guess he would have been only 25 at that point. And it was a comedy. It was called Mr. and Mrs. Swordplay. It was a short. It does not exist anymore, but it was apparently enough of a success that he was then allowed to direct a romance called Pure Love, which is also lost. He made many lost films in the early parts of his career. All the films he made at Shochiku are lost now, and eventually he became frustrated with working there, and it was in 1934 that he moved to Toho. I'm sure that studio will be familiar to listeners. Kurosawa and Godzilla both worked there.
Never did anything else other than those two.
And Wife Be Like a Rose, which he made in 1935, was his breakthrough film. It was an enormous domestic success, and as you said before, an international success.
And from there, he basically became a Toho mainstay, just kind of churning them out, probably doing them at a certain budget level, never really broke genre very often. I will say that something really interesting about his films after a particular period of time is that he would shoot in Toho scope, aka kind of anamorphic or cinemascope, in black and white, which you very rarely see because once you move to cinemascope, you usually move to color. But I love cinemascope black and white film, especially when they're domestic dramas, where they're capturing a different kind of angle than you would expect on, things that are claustrophobic.
And I mean, sorry, I hate to keep bringing back the same few directors over and over again, but yeah, Ozu created his own language, his own style of composition. I wouldn't say Naruse did that, but every shot is remarkably composed, remarkably beautiful in a way that's not really obtrusive.
And so moving on, let's jump another 4 years, basically when the director was almost done, aka passed away, which is the only way that he would stop making movies. I know that we both watched Yearning from 1964.
Another beautiful film. Oh my God. I mean, the thing about talking about him is I do think like a lot of what's great about him is right there.
But it is a tough sell, I think, to people. When you talk about like, oh yeah, they're domestic dramas about like sadness and time passing by, and you're like, can I watch a Kurosawa movie? Like they're a little bit more like out there and in your face.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I would sell them is just you will be very moved and you will think about your own life.
Well, they're very Douglas Sirkian, I feel, without
the camp.
The camp and like the the colors and the bigness of Douglas Sirk.
So this film is about a war widow. The main character is named Reiko, played again by Hideko Takamine. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. She was married to her husband for 6 months before he died in the war, and it's been 18 years since. And in those 18 years, she has held on to his memory. She has considered herself still married to her late husband, and in fact, out of love and devotion to her late husband, has cared for his family and has continued the grocery store, the small grocery store that he ran.
But now, one of the sisters of her dead husband wants her to get out of the house. That she's tired of her, she needs to move on with her life.
And further, there are huge changes in the grocery store business.
That's right, that supermarkets are coming into play, kicking out the family-owned single unit ones.
So the family is trying to figure out a way to get her out. They want to potentially create a supermarket. Is she going to be involved in it? Is she qualified to be involved in it? Also, there's her brother-in-law,
played by Yuzo Kayama,
who was 9 years old when she married her late husband. She was much younger than he was, and she's cared for him ever since. And now that he's in his early 20s, he has begun to develop feelings for her. You could call them quasi-incestuous feelings.
Especially because she knew him that young.
Right. But he is a young ruffian and roustabout. He's always drinking and gambling and finding loose women.
Down at the pachinko parlor, playing those little balls that I look at and go, how do you play this game? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in love with her. And so she realizes not only is she being, forced out of or encouraged to leave this grocery store business, but she's also has to beat off the advances, the affections of, basically someone she raised. And so she eventually makes a decision that she's going to go to the country and leave everyone behind. And with allegedly a new beau, who, of course, is the old beau. It's her old husband. But she says she has someone else because in Japan at this time, at least in the circle she's traveling in, you either have a husband or you don't,
Yep. Like she wouldn't leave if she didn't have a husband.
That's right.
Is she like an independent person or something?
Exactly. And then the emotional climax that this movie builds to is really amazing, especially the way that it gets there. She's on the train. Her brother-in-law sees through her immediately, realizes what's going on. You don't have a new beau. So he follows her onto the train, and they share this train ride that is just amazing. And I'm not going to be able to do justice to it.
Maybe
with
there's
words.
a little bit of yearning in it.
Yeah. But you're just kind of on this train with them for a while. And you see things pass by, you hear their conversation, you see the sunset, and you're kind of just living in these very complicated feelings. The sadness of leaving things behind, the inevitability of time passing, the complexity of inconvenient feelings. And probably shouldn't spoil it anymore from there, should we?
No, I think that people can pretty much guess where it's going, but, let's leave it in the air. We want people to discover these movies. But as you can tell just from that plot synopsis, it's like all the other films that we talked about. Very complicated, dealing with a woman's feelings in a society that doesn't know what to do with her. That she did everything right for 18 years, and now she's expected to just go on, just do her own thing.
Now, the last movie that we watched for this was one that you found that I also had never heard of before, and I don't think it's really considered one of the most famous ones.
No.
But it's interesting, and it's quite different than the other ones that we talked about. Well, it's similar in some ways, but it's different stylistically, I think. It's called Hit and Run, also known as Moment of Terror from 1964.
And what's interesting about this one is that it's basically Naruse making a revenge film where a woman's son is hit by a car, dies. And she finds out who did it, which was a woman having an affair who was driving a car and didn't want to stop.
And having an affair with a very wealthy man.
Mm-hmm. And when she learns this, she decides, I will take revenge on this woman by integrating myself in her household and killing her son, who was the same age as my son when he died.
And by the way, this woman is played again by Hideko Takamine, who gives a much different performance than what she gave in those other films. Much more like hysterical and forceful, which, you know, after the other movies, I think is quite fun to see. I also find this movie, I mean, stylistically, it's much more ostentatious than the others. There's a lot more like suspense and obvious drama and obvious melodrama. But I mean, the emotions in it too are very difficult and complicated.
Thematically, I think it continues with his work in the sense that it's like women having to make choices in their lives of where they take these very difficult things. Where do they go? And I mean, out of all the films that we talked about, this is the one that has the darkest of all endings. Like, when it happened, I was genuinely shocked. It's a weird one to talk about because it was one of the last films that he made, and it felt like him trying to do something different than he usually does. Because, like, around this period in the mid-'60s is like, there was a rise of crime films coming out of Japanese cinema. It almost seems trying to put himself in that mold while still using his actors and his techniques. And I don't know if it's a perfect fit, but it's an interesting fit to see him tackle the material in his way.
His extraordinary productivity began to ebb in the 1960s. In 1969, he died of cancer at the age of only 63.
I mean, the man still was able to pump out 89 films?
89 or 90. I've seen both numbers cited. I think it's a little hard when some of them are lost to get an exact tally.
I do think it demands more study why he isn't talked about more, in the sense that I knew his names. I'd never seen any of his films.
Yeah, I'd seen one of them before, just by randomly once before. But yeah, I never quite got to him, and I feel ashamed about that because I don't know. If you were to ask me why I never watched one, I think it's just because big, intimidating filmography, and they're
like, what are they?
Well, it's not. It's like, I know what Throne of Blood is.
Yes, a guy gets hit by arrows at the end.
Yeah,
like, that's fun, right?
Yeah. So if folks don't know how to tackle him, I would honestly just say, like, go straight into the most famous ones. Watch
Yearning,
A Woman Ascends the Stairs.
They're all on the Criterion Channel too.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to continue exploring him, you know, as I get older and wiser.
Well, if you want a particular emotion, like that kind of complicated feeling of having to make a decision, especially from a feminist perspective, this is where you would go to see these, because that's all his movies. And I'd be curious to see, like, as he's, you know, wrestling with these themes over and over again, the different angles that he finds on them. And that's very promising of like, ooh, I can't wait to watch more of his movies.
I'll give him the best compliment I can, which is that his movies made me think, I'm going to do William Friedkin's voice. He made me think deeply about the human condition.
So, as per usual, you can send us letters at importancecineclubpodcast@gmail.com.
And if we don't read your letter, we're sorry. But we're actually getting to the point where we get a lot of letters.
Our next letter is from...
our first letter.
Roman Tano. Where am I? Oh, so sick, Will. Will prods me. I'm like, oh, I gotta keep going. Okay.
Dance, monkey, dance.
Hey, y'all. Thank you all for making the only listenable film podcast in this format. Been listening for a couple of years, and I'm a Patreon subscriber anytime my card has $5 on it.
Wow, you hear that? The only listenable film podcast. Hear those other guys?
I've gotten the impression that Will and I share an interest in certain type of action film. Movies with a sort of tease, grit, tear you up, ugly intensity. Hey, now, what? You think I'm some kind of softie? As Will says, and I have to edit out almost every second week, Will's the nice one. I'm the mean one.
You edit that out? It's true, folks.
All right. And the letter continues, sometimes combined with a poetic sensibility or social conscience. I'm thinking of filmmakers like Peckinpah, Mann, Ringo Lam, Aldrich, Carlson. My problem is that I'm having a hard time finding more films that scratch that itch. More films that can make me openly weep in the middle of a fight scene. While I love filmmakers like Fuller Hawks Wu, their essential joyousness just keeps them from hitting the vibe I'm talking about. Except Shock Corridor, Criminal Code, and Bullet in the Head. More and more I find myself chasing the dragon in ugly scenes in other genres. Surprised to find myself stewing so frequently in that Malden Lee scene in Streetcar. Do you all have recommendations of films or filmmakers that deliver this kind of thing?
So tough, gritty action movies with a poetic eye.
Here's the thing. If you chase that dragon, you're going to hit a wall. Then nothing will please you to get that emotional feeling out of you. You know what you got to do? Watch a little Naruse.
Yeah, that's
Deal
right.
with those complicated feelings in that way.
And then recharge yourself, and then you can go back and maybe
to it, yeah.
find something else, a more mature person. It's an interesting question. I don't know all that you've seen, but if I'm just thinking off the top of my head, have you seen Year of the Dragon by Michael Cimino?
Mm-hmm.
I would also maybe suggest certain Don Siegel movies like Charlie Varick or The Lineup.
Look into Japanese cinema, especially like 70s Yakuza films, if you want that kind of like gritty meanness to these fight scenes, because there's also that kind of raw emotionality in them as well. Specifically, the director that we're doing next week, and stuff like Kinju Fukasaku has a lot of movies in that vein. So I would recommend checking those out.
Fear City by Abel Ferrara.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I like that.
That kind of rawness, angry, no joy in the action.
Yeah.
I mean,
Maniac Cop. Have you seen Is that a bit of a stretch? Maniac Cop?
Yeah, it sounds like he's looking for...
It's very New York.
Basically that Phil Carlson feel. That sweaty men slapping each other.
Buddy, I'm looking for that Phil Carlson feel all the time. Yeah.
So hopefully there were some filmmakers there that you never heard of before.
Oh, Walter Hill.
Yeah, of course. He knows Walter
Okay,
Hill.
he knows Walter Hill.
Yeah. You know what? Go into noirs. Like, especially, like, stuff like Anthony Mann's films, because you'll find that kind of, like, manly, sweaty feel as well.
Yeah, look at the Columbia noirs as well, the stuff that the Columbia studio was producing.
All right. So our next letter is from Jibril Mahmood, and he goes, Dear Justin and Will, is there a large tome of a book on the history of Indian micro-budget cinema you'd be able to recommend? Low Down Dirty Pictures just covers the marquee Sundance kids, but I want more, damn it.
Okay, a book about micro-budget films. So Down and Dirty Pictures, the example he cited was that very famous book by Peter Biskind about Sundance and about the rise of Harvey Weinstein's Miramax.
Well,
are you thinking about like mumblecore or that sort of thing?
The problem is that there's not really any kind of canon for those types of films, because if you're making micro-budget pictures, you probably didn't really make that much afterwards.
Well, also like micro-budget is such a broad term. Like it could mean Ed Wood, honestly. It could mean Maya Deren.
I think he means like late 80s, early 90s. What I would recommend, I don't have any in front of me right now, is look for journals of people that wrote making movies. Is that you get kind of that global idea of what making movies is and like trying to push forward and get those movies seen.
Are you thinking of like Robert Rodriguez's book?
Yeah, but that's not the one I would recommend because he's a Sundance kid. Like, but that's the issue, right? Is that we know these filmmakers because they succeeded, which is why we would be reading their stories.
I would be curious. I mean, I guess nobody cares about the mumblecore stuff. As much as they did in 2005.
I would love a book about the history of mumblecore.
Yeah, it's like Joe Swanberg and all that shit. Like, I want to know, the cradle to grave.
I should go shake Mark Hansen because he loved that stuff. So he could definitely write a book chronicling. Like, how long did that last? 5 years?
I mean, it sort of turned into, Adam Wingard went and made different and I think better kind of stuff, frankly.
Godzilla versus King Kong.
Well, yes. Yeah, I was thinking more like A Horrible Way to Die, that sort of thing. But also there was like the Safdie brothers and Frownland and
Uncle Kent. Well, that's a Joe Swanberg one.
That's a Swanberg one.
Yeah.
But I was thinking like that Safdie brothers sensibility because they were in New York as opposed to Chicago. And I rather prefer the New York kind of thing.
But yeah, I can't really think of like an oral history in that sense. If somebody knows one, write it in the comments of this post because I would love to read it because I love all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there hasn't been a canon though because mumblecore was
has been completely forgotten basically.
Well, it was very brief.
Yeah,
and I guess nobody wants to write the book. And then after that, micro budget is too diffuse a thing.
I want I don't remember his last name. Who made Computer Chess? Andrzej.
Bajalski?
Yeah, and he made the other early mumblecore films too. I want them like all running in parallel and want to read that story. I would love it.
Oh, if you're interested in this sort of thing, maybe you would be interested in watching the documentary Blank City, which is an earlier era of micro-budget movies. It's the no-wave movies that were being made in extreme poverty in like the late 70s and early 1980s in New York. Check out Blank City. I'm sure you can find it on Tubi or something.
And I'm sure there's a book on no-wave cinema, right?
Probably,
I feel like I read it.
There's Death Tripping, which is the book about the cinema of transgression. That's a good.
And that is definitely like the micro budget didn't go anywhere afterwards, in the sense that like that's the kind of like dead ends you want to read. Because like the Joe Swanberg, where is he now? Directing television. That's what he's doing. And that's boring to read, right? Like this was a guy that in his prime was like, I want to start a personal Patreon where you pay me enough money to make 5 movies a year. Like that, I love that idea though.
Yeah.
And now he's like probably like sitting back in a mansion or something like that.
And he did that. He was a live streamer basically before you had, you know. And
I remember
except he stopped the stream after 90 minutes and released
Love it. I mean, Greta Gerwig used to star in those movies. Now she's directing.
Has left him in the dust.
Yeah, the Barbie movie. All right. So thank you very much for that letter. And our next letter is from Enrico Cioni, and he goes, Dear Justin and Will, I've been enjoying your podcast for about 2 years now, so I thought I'd write to thank you for all the hours I spent listening to your breezy and insightful and informative conversations. And thank you for introducing me to Ed Wood, The Three Stooges, Bela Lugosi meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. Wow, what things to be introduced to. Most recently, you've inspired me to rewatch some old Looney Tunes shorts. Well, I'm glad we're continuing this trend.
Very proud.
I also have 2 questions in case you haven't been asked before. When you go to the cinema, where do you like to sit? About a year ago, I discovered that sitting in the middle of the front row in any of the screening rooms of my nearest cinema makes for a fantastic immersive experience and without any of the neck ache I would have expected. One of the many films I've watched from that position is The Godfather Part 2, and at any moment I feel like Al Pacino is going to unhinge his jaw and devour me whole. Where do you like to sit in the theater, Will?
Depends very much on the theater, I would say. It depends on the size of the screen, the size of the venue. Standard multiplex, like the Scotiabank here in Toronto, probably halfway up.
Yeah, I think like we usually sit 4 rows up from the middle. Usually when I go with Emily, we sit off to the side because we don't want to be bothered by anyone. People being like, oh, the Important Cinema Club. I'm like, oh, no, thank you.
I mean, folks, you got to understand there are certain cinemas here in Toronto where we do get recognized.
I was being sarcastic in that sense, though.
It's true, though. It's true.
Oh, yes.
Justin's kidding because he doesn't want to be recognized. No.
I wear like Groucho glasses, a mustache.
Yeah, be very inconspicuous. At the TIFF Lightbox in Cinema 1 or 2, I like to sit pretty close.
When was the last time you sat in Cinema 1 and 2?
I was just there last weekend.
Really?
I saw Jean Dielman there.
Oh, because the 1 and 2 is usually reserved for the new Mongrel or E1 film.
I know, they put the repertory stuff in shitty Cinema 4, and because I guess they have deals with various...
Yeah, they do have deals, that's why.
Well, Jean Dielman, because it's pretty big now, so popular that they put it in Cinema 1. So I did see that there. And it was great. I mean, it was actually really nice.
Where'd you sit?
About halfway up. Normally I would sit a little closer, though.
I don't really have that much of a like need or where I usually sit here. Not the front row, though. Too close to the screen for me.
I remember reading, I think it was in Nathan Rabin's book, how the first time he went to a Chicago press screening was like in like 1998, and he sat in a seat, and Gene Siskel came up behind him and tapped him and said, "Young man, you're sitting in my seat." Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
I'd be like, "Is your name on this?"
Yeah.
Get out of here, old man.
Yeah, the less talented of the.
I've been seeing a lot of people who are like, I think I'm more of a Gene Siskel man, and I gotta say, he didn't really like movies. He kind of tumbled into that position.
I would just say Gene Siskel was wrong more times than Ebert was. Just think about that.
Yes.
On the other hand, he was always ringside at those Chicago Bulls games.
Loved it.
Loved the Bulls. Cared more about the Bulls than movies, and you got to respect that.
The question is, who fucked more?
I think they both fucked a lot, but but Siskel hung out at the Playboy Mansion.
He did.
He was friends with half. He probably fucked more and better.
Well, now we know.
And then became a family man. So Siskel, hats off to him.
When is the date that people will look at you and be like, what are you talking about when you bring up Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel?
I see them on Twitter sometimes.
Really?
I see
Because this is your brand. Like one day you'll be like, I say Roger Ebert says this, and the comments will be like, who is that? Because everybody who would comment and know has died and passed away.
Well, it's a good point because Roger Ebert used to be pretty central to like film discourse.
When did Roger Ebert get off television?
Well, when he lost his jaw.
Yeah, I know, but when did he like leave television? Like
probably like 2012-ish or so, officially.
So it's not that far. That's
But also like, so he died in like 2013 or 14, and it used to be like he was the guy everyone checked.
Yeah.
Like he was so central, and now there are probably a lot of Zoomers and shit who don't even know.
Because like at the top of his popularity, mid-90s, 30 years ago. So that's a long time.
But I do see people posting Siskel and Ebert clips sometimes.
Yes, they do.
Because they're funny.
Someone has a book on Siskel and Ebert coming out soon, I think.
Really? I hope it's not sappy, like, oh, they loved the movies. I mean, Siskel and
you want like the tell-all, right?
Yeah, and I also want some acknowledgement of the fact that Siskel and Ebert was like a funny show where like two kind of medium smart guys yelled at each other. Mm-hmm. Like us.
Yeah, I was going to say, you beat me to it. One day, we'll get that book, and it'll be published by Bear Manor Media. It'll be like the Gene Siskel biography. I'm sure there's already one if you went looking. Well, thank you very much for the letter. There's also a question here in this letter about Soviet comedies. I don't think me and Will have much to say about that.
I'm sorry, I really don't know a lot about Soviet comedies, but I would love to know more if you have any recommendations. Tell me what the good ones are.
They talk here about the Soviet Three Stooges.
Oh,
whose names translate to coward, worldly, and fool. Well, we definitely going to have to do more research into this.
Yes, please.
So thank you very much for the letter. And as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week on our Patreon episode, we're talking about, everyone is talking about this, Wade Williams.
Okay, Wade Williams was a notorious and much hated film distributor and collector who passed away this week. He was the man who took Ed Wood's widow to court. He was the man who made a shot-for-shot remake of Detour. We watched that film.
We did.
And we discussed Wade Williams' enormous toxic legacy. That on the Patreon, plus years and years of content.
Yeah, you can check that out. $5 a month, patreon.com/The Important Cinema Club. We didn't even talk about this, Will, because it was a couple weeks ago. But we have some Golden Ninja Video Blu-rays coming out.
Oh, that's right. Okay. White Zombie, the great Bela Lugosi horror movie.
And now this is something prompted by Will, because he met somebody who was selling a 60mm print of White Zombie.
Well, my friend Eric, I've had this 60mm print of White Zombie that I saw him project years ago, and it's beautiful. It's a very well-loved print that was saved from a library. It has a sort of like... You know, it's not pristine.
Saved from the library in the sense that they were throwing it out and they pulled it out of the dumpster.
It was saved from the dumpster, and it has this very ghostly image, this strange, otherworldly image that 16mm film gives. And we wanted to preserve that.
Will was like, can we do something? I'm like, all right, this is how we're going to sell it. We're going to sell it like movies don't look this way anymore.
Yes.
Because everything is pristine now. Everyone wants everything looking great. And I went, well, what if we just admitted, like, this is what the film looks like.
But it's beautiful because a 16mm print that has seen life, you know, are you tired of seeing movies look completely airbrushed and all color corrected to look fashionable for today?
But that's the thing about color correction is oftentimes they're color corrected to look at the norms of today.
That's right.
Versus what they would have looked like originally.
There are many ways to watch White Zombie. There are
thousands of ways.
And this is one particularly beautiful way.
And we should say that we thought the main selling point would be to you, the listener of the Important Cinema Club, because me and Will recorded intros where we're in costume. We're doing shtick.
So this Blu-ray for White Zombie is loaded with extras. You can watch the movie or you can watch a version with horror host segments. Justin and I, dressed in costumes, doing dumb shtick, will guide you through the movie. There will also be an audio commentary. There will be interviews. You interviewed a 16mm film expert. A whole bunch of stuff.
Yep. So you can.
And a whole bonus movie.
Oh yeah. Newly scanned as well.
Bela Lugosi's The Mystery of the Mary Celeste. Never been on Blu-ray.
And I think that the set is going to be 2 discs too. One of them probably in a little paper case because I do want like a good version of Mary Celeste on there. I mean, a good version. It's scanned from a 60mm print, but this film has never been available anywhere in high definition. Nowhere.
So it's going to be great, guys. Come on.
Yep. You can pick it up at goldenninjavideo.com. And we also have King of the Bullwhip.
King of the Bullwhip, a great Poverty Row Western starring Lash LaRue, who was the King of the Bullwhip. Do you like cowboys? Do you like fist fights?
Do you like Tom Neal, star of Detour?
Oh, man, you're going to have fun with this. It's a really fun Western by Ron Ormond, the director of such classics as If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do?
So we're going to do a video feature on Ron Ormond where we just talk about his career.
Absolutely. As well as commentaries, the whole shebang.
Do you know that a bunch of those Ron Ormond films were remastered by Nicholas Winding Refn? That site does not exist anymore. It's gone.
I know, but the transfers exist. They're out there.
They do. They're out there. But that's so frustrating that I feel like some of those movies are not up there. Like they just like disappeared because people didn't bother to pick them up because they were just.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, I mean I did too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Come on, NWR, what are you doing?
Let's get in touch with Nicholas Winding Refn and make a deal. We'll
Release them on Blu-ray.
yeah, why not?
Yeah, just give them to us. You got these transfers. Why not? We'll do it. So you can pick up both those Blu-rays, White Zombie and King of the Bullwhip, at goldninjavideo.com now.
All right, so next week, Japan month continues.
Yeah, we're doing a filmmaker that me and Will, again, are not that familiar with, Hideo Gosha, but I'm fascinated by him because he made very like powerful Yakuza films, worked for a long time, into the 80s, and his style kind of became kind of like big, bloated, almost prestige picture, but he started with like these mean, vicious films like The Wolves. So we'll be checking that out. We need someone like that, like a Kinji Fukusaki type. So.
I'm very excited. I don't know him at all, so yeah, I want a new favorite director.
So that's what we'll be doing next week. Until then, my name's Justin Leclue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Just wanted to make a quick announcement that I will be hosting a new screening series online at twitch.tv/Important Cinema Club. Every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, I will be showing a film usually related to next week's topic. It's a chance for all of us listeners to get together, chat about movies, and, get a little bit of a taste of the thing that we'll be talking about on the upcoming episode. I hope everybody can join us. It's open to everybody, whether you're a Patreon subscriber or not. But if you are a mega member of the Important Cinema Club Patreon, you can vote every week from a bunch of choices of what movie we'll watch. Again, this is happening every Monday at 8 p.m. EST. It'll be hosted by me every week. Maybe there'll be prizes that are given away. There'll be a cartoon, a movie, maybe even a little bit more. I hope that I'll see you there. And for more information, just check out the Important Cinema Club on Twitter or just follow me at DeCloux, DECLOUX, letter J. Hope I'll see you at the Important Cinema Club, Cinematech. I would also like to thank new Patreon members John Hayes, Ben Hartman, Axel Steele, Philip Jeffries, Eric Wicklund, Kenneth Bigley, Kenneth Hunt, Ian Bennett, Alex, Matt H., and Amara Maka. Thank you very much for becoming patrons. We could not keep doing this without you.
We wanted to laugh after we watched this week's Patreon subject, Wade Williams' Detour. So we, logically picked the best thing.
Well, I was telling Justin that Curly Joe Dorita made a series of short films at Columbia in the 1940s. Now, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, you may be wondering, who's Curly Joe Dorita? Just a quick refresher.
Okay.
Because as Stan Lee said, every comic could be somebody's first comic. Mm-hmm. Curly Joe Dorita was the last stooge. When the Three Stooges became popular again in the 1950s and 60s, Moe and Larry said, well, Shemp's dead, Curly's dead, we need a new Curly. So they got Joe Dorita, who was a heavy-set vaudevillian, a journeyman who'd been around for a long time. They shaved his head and they called him Curly Joe, and he was not funny.
But Joe Dorita had made some shorts for Columbia with the Three Stooges team.
Yeah, he was on the lot at the same time as the Stooges were. The Stooges made films at Columbia from 1934 to 1958. They were there forever. Curly Joe had, 6 months in the mid-40s. So, I mean, I've seen these films before because I'm a Curly Joe super fan. And when I found out that Justin had never seen a Curly Joe short film, I said, what? What? How have you never seen a Curly Joe film? So there's one called Wedlock Deadlock. There's one called Jitterbug House. There's one called The Good Bad Egg. The one we watched is called Slappily Married.
Now, I gotta say, I laughed a lot watching the short.
Yes.
Because imagine a Three Stooges short that only starred Larry, because Curly Joe has hair in this. Yeah. That bald look that he had as Curly Joe Dorita, that's something he shaved his head to get that look.
So he has long, stringy hair.
Emo Phillips style hair.
Right. And you say Larry as well because Curly Joe is the tofu stooge.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a lot of personality. So imagine it was a Three Stooges short, but it was just one guy getting hurt.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny.
Yeah, I think he's way funny. I mean, he's not funny really, but the short.
Well, he's who's the director on the short?
It's Edward Burns, who was one of the Three Stooges' most prolific directors. He later directed Zsa Zsa Gabor in Queen of Outer Space and Return of the Fly.
And so like this short open was Curly Joe going, "Oh, it's Friday the 13th. It's unlucky today." And then just proceeds to him just destroying a kitchen.
So yeah, there's a very clean 3-act structure here. He's trying to cook in the kitchen. He's trying to make eggs or a cake or something, and he keeps falling on him.
Just like the way that it's structured, though, there's like a cartooniness to the Three Stooges because they're always bouncing off of each other. When it's Curly Joe by himself, it's just a man being like, "Oh!" He gets like hit in the head by a plate.
Mo and Curly are such strong comic personalities. They're such strong like caricatures. Curly Joe is just a guy.
Yeah.
He's
So it's like seeing a guy tortured by his house.
Yes. And the fact that there are no other guys to play off is so funny. So there's that. Then there's the middle section where he apparently owns a shoe store.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fine. He owns a shoe
that's
store.
fine.
I got to go to work at my shoe store.
But the short really comes to life in the third part.
Oh, God. So he has to go see his wife at this
A hotel for women.
hotel for women. So you can imagine what happens. He's in drag, you know.
But the highlight of the short is Curly Joe pretending to be a table that then gets ironed by a woman.
Yeah.
And it just cuts to Curly Joe, stringy, long black hair, covered in sweat. We're like looking up at his face, just trying not to scream, being like,
I mean, just the idea of him hiding as an ironing board.
Yes.
He's got clothes on top of him, body outstretched, and that she's ironing his back, and the camera is closed in on his face from underneath his stringy hair hanging.
yeah.
Sweat dripping from his bow.
It's funny.
And the fact that it's Curly Joe, too, who, like, you know, he's not a strong character. He's just a guy. And he's being tortured.
The thing about Curly Joe is that he would always say in interviews, like, he didn't get the Three Stooges style of humor, and he never got to show his own humor. What is that? Like, these shorts do not tell you that.
I don't know if he would understand any kind of humor. Mm-hmm. The man wasn't funny.
So after that Joe Dorita short, we're like, all right, we need more laughs. Let's watch some Shemp solo shorts.
Yeah, so we watched one called Bride and Gloom, which was hilarious.
Here's the thing. Shemp rocks.
I love Shemp.
There's no irony to us saying that Shemp is funny.
Yeah. Do you like Shemp a little more than Curly, even?
We talked about this. As a kid, you love Curly. I think Curly is the entryway to Three Stooges as a child, because you understand this large childlike man being like doing all this big physical acts. Shemp is the blue collar stooge, the thinking man stooge.
That's right.
Is that like, man, that mug just doing those like double takes?
I mean, well, I don't want to body shame Shemp. His face is remarkable, though.
Yes.
I mean,
brought to life by Drew Friedman, basically. Like, he exists only for that.
I mean, we might not have Drew Friedman as an artist if Shemp's face didn't exist.
One of the big jokes in the Shemp short is that his wife looking at a photo and going, "He's so beautiful. How can I say no to that?" That's the joke. He looks at himself in the mirror in the short and goes, "Whoa."
Speaking of these particular stooges, I do want to tell you that I went on eBay and bought probably the prized possession in my home right now. If you go on eBay, I think you could still find one of these, an actual piece of one of Curly Joe Dorita's short pants.
Okay, so you bought this for yourself.
Yeah.
I thought that, like, your girlfriend bought it for you as a present.
No, I bought it for me as a present. It's an actual authentic piece of short pant material.
How is it authentic?
Well, probably.
Like, he shit in it? Like
I think it's Curly Joe's, I think, grandkids or something, or his nephew, or I think his widow used to run the Three Stooges company.
Okay, yeah.
So,
because as we've talked about before, that a lawyer decided that Curly Joe's family owned the rights to the Stooges.
not just any lawyer, Bela Lugosi Jr.
Ugh. Yep.
He represented the Doritas. Yeah.
So are you?
That's a whole other story.
Are you going to have a hallway in your home dedicated to Curly Joe Dorita?
Yeah, because I do have a piece of his stationery as well. I want to get more and more of his short pants material and stitch it together and be like
Like a Frankenstein.
yeah, like Buffalo Bill.
Wait, so I can just imagine walking into Will's home and there's like a hallway and it's like the short pants, his stationery, like a full poster of like the short that we watched.
And then his corpse mummified like Norman Bates's mother. It's like, "Hi, Justin, do you want to meet Curly Joe?"
And I'm like, wow, he's way more lifelike than he was on screen.